The frost bit through my slippers as I opened the door, and that's when I saw her. My daughter standing barefoot on the porch, breath trembling in the dark. Behind me the house was warm. Lights were on. And laughter drifted from the living room like nothing was wrong. It was a quiet winter night in a small, ordinary house at the edge of town, the kind where routines keep life steady and predictable. I had put my daughter to bed hours earlier, kissed her forehead, and locked the door like I always did. Nothing in that moment suggested the night would fracture into something I still struggle to name. The porch light flickered the way it always did when the night air turned sharp. Not off, not on, just uncertain. Like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to reveal. I remember thinking it needed fixing. I remember thinking about small things like that. I opened the door barefoot, the cold slipping in low along the floor, and for a moment I didn't understand what I was seeing. The porch was empty in the way porches usually are at night. Dark corners. A railing wet with frost. My breath rising in thin clouds. Then I looked down. She was standing there. My daughter. She didn't knock. Didn't call my name. Didn't cry. She just stood beneath the light, blinking slowly, as if she'd been waiting longer than I had. Her pajamas were the thin cotton ones with the faded stars, the kind I only let her wear in summer. They hung loose on her shoulders. Her arms were bare. Her feet, God, her feet were red and stiff against the wood, toes curled inward like they were trying to disappear. I said her name once. Testing it. She didn't look at me. Instead, her eyes stayed fixed somewhere behind my shoulder, past the doorframe into the house. Her gaze was calm in a way that scared me. Not sleepy. Not frightened. Just observant. Like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The cold finally reached my ankles then, sharp and biting, and it snapped me back into my body. I stepped forward, pulling the door wider, the hinges groaning like they always did. I wrapped my hands around her shoulders. She was colder than I expected. Not just chilly. Cold through. I pulled her toward me, my coat still hanging on the hook behind the door, and she let me. No resistance. No relief either. Her body moved the way a doll's does when you lift it. Compliant, distant. How did you get out here? Yes. My voice sounded wrong. Too loud. Like it didn't belong to the night. She didn't answer. I looked down at her hair, messy with sleep, a single braid undone and brushing her cheek. Her eyelashes were damp, but her eyes were dry. She hadn't been crying. That detail settled in my chest and stayed there. Behind me, from somewhere deeper in the house, laughter drifted up. It was warm laughter. Familiar. The kind that belongs to shared jokes and glowing screens. My husband's voice, low and amused. The television murmuring underneath. The normal sounds of an ordinary night, still moving along without us. The contrast felt wrong. Cold at the door. Warmth behind me. I turned my head slightly, listening. Counting voices without meaning to. Everything sounded as it should. Too much as it should. I looked back at my daughter. "Sweetheart," I said, quieter now. "Why are you outside?" Her eyes flicked to mine then, just for a second. There was something unfocused in them, like she was waking up from a dream she didn't fully remember. Her lips parted, as if she might speak. Then she looked past me again. I followed her gaze without wanting to. The hallway light spilled out onto the porch in a pale rectangle. The rug by the door was folded the way I always folded it. The shoes were lined up neatly along the wall. Nothing disturbed. Nothing rushed. I knew. I had tucked her into bed hours ago. I remembered the weight of her blankets. The way she'd asked for water, then another story, then one more minute of my hand on her back. I remembered closing her door. I pulled her inside then, the cold peeling away slowly as the heat wrapped around us. The door closed with a solid sound behind us. Too solid. The lock slid into place without resistance. I stood there holding her, my arms tightening without thinking. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and popcorn. The clock in the kitchen ticked steadily, marking time like it hadn't been interrupted. The laughter rose again. My husband glanced over from the couch, smiling without really looking. "Everything okay?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I looked down at my daughter. She was still staring, still listening, her head tilted slightly now, like she was trying to place a sound she couldn't quite catch. "Go upstairs," I heard myself say. "Let me get you something warm." She nodded once. That was all. As she took the first step toward the stairs, I noticed her footprints on the tile. Already fading. Each one a quiet question I didn't have the words for. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, my hand still on the lock. I turned it once. Just to be sure. The porch light flickered again through the glass. For a moment I never talk about, I thought I saw movement out there. Not a person. Just a shift in the darkness, like the night itself was adjusting its weight. I blinked. There was nothing. I followed her upstairs, counting each step behind her. The floor creaked beneath us, familiar sounds that should have been comforting. She didn't look back. Not once. At the top of the stairs she paused, her small hand hovering near the wall, fingers brushing the paint like she was checking it was real. I leaned down. "You sure you're okay?" She nodded again. Still no words. I tucked her into my arms once more and carried her the rest of the way down the hall. Her head resting against my shoulder now, finally heavy. Her breath warmed my neck, slow and even. As I passed her bedroom door, I noticed it was open. I was sure I'd closed it. I told myself I was mistaken. That tiredness plays tricks on memory. That houses settle. That children wander. But as I laid her down, pulling the blankets up around her cold legs, I couldn't stop thinking about the porch light. The way it flickered. The way it seemed to hesitate. Like it had almost decided not to show me what was standing there. I sat beside her until her breathing deepened, until her hand loosened its grip on my sleeve. I listened to the house. The laughter downstairs. The hum of electricity in the walls. The quiet settling back into place. Everything sounded normal again. And that frightened me more than if it hadn't. Because somewhere between the door and the stairs, something had gone wrong. Something quiet. Something careful. And I didn't yet know if it was finished with us. The warmth hit us all at once. Too fast. Like the house was eager to erase the cold. I closed the door with my foot, careful not to let it slam, and the heater hummed softly from the vent near the stairs. My coat was still wrapped around my daughter, the fabric heavy and familiar, carrying the faint smell of my perfume and the outside night. Her body stayed stiff inside it, not leaning into me, not pulling away either. Just there. The living room lights glowed a dull yellow, casting soft shadows along the walls. Everything looked the way it always did at this hour. The framed family photos, vacations, birthdays, awkward school portraits, sat straight and dusted, smiling back at me like evidence of something stable. 2 mugs rested on the coffee table, one with a ring of steam still curling up, the other half empty and cooling slowly. Warm. Recent. The television murmured on, some sitcom laugh track rising and falling, filling the room with borrowed joy. My husband sat on the couch, one arm draped along the back, eyes half focused on the screen. He laughed at the right moment, a soft, careless sound. When he finally looked over, his smile was easy, unconcerned. "Oh," he said. "Hey." That was all. No pause. No question. His eyes flicked down to our daughter, then back to the screen, like he'd already decided there was nothing unusual to see. I stood there holding her, my fingers tightening at the collar of my coat. The floor beneath my feet was warm through the thin soles of my slippers. I could feel my toes starting to sting as the cold left them. Felt wrong to feel relieved. "She got cold?" he asked lightly, still smiling. Not with his eyes. Just his mouth. I nodded once. My daughter shifted slightly in my arms, the fabric of the coat whispering as she moved. She still wasn't looking at either of us. Her gaze drifted around the room instead, landing on familiar objects as if she were seeing them for the first time. The lamp by the window. The old bookshelf with the crooked shelf. The hallway leading upstairs. She lingered there. I followed her eyes again, the same quiet dread settling behind my ribs. The hallway was dim, the overhead light off. Shadows pooled at the base of the stairs. Everything was still. Too still. My husband muted the television. The laughter cut off abruptly, leaving a thin ringing silence behind it. "What's going on?" he asked, finally turning toward us fully. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Words felt heavy, dangerous, like once I let them out they might not come back the same. "She was outside," I said finally. He blinked. "Once. Outside. On the porch," I added, my voice low even. I surprised myself with how calm it sounded. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "She must have sleepwalked or something." "Sleepwalk?" He said it the way people say rain might come tomorrow. Casual. Unthreatening. I looked at my daughter. "Did you go outside by yourself?" "Yes." She didn't answer. Her hands were still tucked inside the sleeves of my coat, fingers hidden, shoulders slightly hunched like she was bracing against something no one else could feel. Her face stayed blank, not stubborn, not scared. Absent. My husband leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay, kiddo?" She glanced at him then, just briefly. A flicker of recognition passed over her face. Then she looked away again, back toward the hallway. "I put her to bed," I said quietly. "I remember it." He nodded. "Sure. Kids get up. You know that." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in just a little. I became aware of how warm it was, how safe it should have felt, and how much it didn't. I carried her toward the couch, setting her down beside him. The cushions dipped beneath her weight, swallowing her small body. She curled her legs under herself instinctively, still wrapped in my coat. My husband reached for the remote again. I watched his hand. The ease of it. The confidence. "Maybe she had a bad dream," he said. "Maybe." I moved toward the kitchen, my legs feeling unsteady now that I wasn't holding her. The tile was cool under my feet. I picked up one of the mugs, the ceramic still warm against my palm. "Coffee. Fresh. How long have you been down here?" "Yes." He didn't look up. "Since I put the game on." "Why? What time was that?" He paused, thinking. "I don't know. 10. Maybe a little after." I nodded again. I counted backward in my head without meaning to. The story I'd read her. The water she'd asked for. The way she'd yawned and turned onto her side. She had been asleep by 10. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, each second loud in the quiet. I set the mug back down carefully, aligning it with the coaster like I always did. "So you didn't go upstairs?" "Yes." "No," he said. "Why would I?" I leaned against the counter, the wood cool through my shirt. From the living room my daughter shifted again. The couch creaked beneath her. I looked at the hallway. The stairs rose up into darkness, each step worn slightly at the center from years of use. I knew every creak, every soft complaint the wood made. If someone had gone up I would have heard it. Wouldn't I? My husband turned to look at me fully now, his brow creasing just a bit. "What's wrong?" I searched his face for something. Concern. Confusion. Anything that mirrored the feeling clawing its way up my throat. I didn't find it. "She was standing on the porch," I said again, slower this time. "Barefoot." That got his attention. His smile faded, replaced with something closer to discomfort. "It's cold out." "I know." Silence stretched between us. The heater clicked on again, blowing warm air across the floor. The house hummed, settling back into itself. My daughter slid off the couch quietly and stood near the base of the stairs. No one noticed at first. She placed one hand on the banister. Just rested it there. I watched her fingers curl around the wood, small and pale. She tilted her head slightly, listening. "Sweetheart," I said softly. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She took one step up, then another. I moved before I thought better of it, crossing the room quickly. "No," I said, not sharply, just firm. Not yet. She stopped. For a moment, she looked at me with something like confusion, as if she couldn't understand why I was interrupting her. Then she nodded. I guided her back toward me, wrapping my arms around her shoulders again. This time she leaned in. Just a little. The warmth behind me felt heavier now. The living room. The lights. The normalcy pressing in on all sides. And somewhere above us, the quiet waited. I held her close, staring up the stairs, trying to picture her alone up there. Trying not to picture someone else with her. The house stayed silent. But it didn't feel empty. The stairs always sounded different at night. Not louder. Just more honest. Each step creaked beneath my weight as I carried her. The sound stretching out into the quiet like it wanted to be noticed. The house had settled into that late-night stillness where every movement feels exposed. No television now. No laughter. Just the low hum of the heater and the soft rhythm of her breathing against my collarbone. She was heavier than usual. Or maybe I was just tired. Her arms were loose around my neck, not clinging, not pushing away. Her head rested against my shoulder. Warm now, almost too warm, as if the cold had never touched her. I could smell her shampoo, faint and sweet, and underneath it something else. The night air, sharp and unfamiliar. Halfway up, the stair beneath my foot groaned longer than the rest. Paused without meaning to. She stirred slightly, her cheek brushing my skin. Almost there, I whispered. I don't know who I was reassuring. At the top of the stairs, the hallway opened up in front of us. The light was still on. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. I always turned it off after I tucked her in. Always. The bulb cast a pale glow along the walls, catching dust in the air, illuminating the small scuffs near the baseboards where her toys sometimes hit too hard. The house felt awake up here. Waiting. Her bedroom door was open. It hadn't been when I left it. I stood there for a moment, holding her, staring at the doorway. The light inside her room spilled into the hall, clean and steady. Too steady. I could see her bed from where I stood. Me. The blankets were folded back neatly, not tangled or kicked aside. The pillow was slightly indented, like a head had rested there recently. Not long ago. The kind of impression that fades slowly, reluctantly. I stepped forward, my foot brushing the edge of the rug. The floorboards inside the room creaked, soft but unmistakable. The sound felt intrusive, like I was interrupting something. I laid her down gently on the bed, smoothing the blanket around her legs. She curled onto her side without a word, facing the wall. Her eyes were already closing, lashes resting against her cheeks as if sleep had been waiting nearby the whole time. "Stay here," I said softly. She nodded. I straightened and looked around the room. Everything was where it should be. The bookshelf with its uneven rows of picture books. The small lamp shaped like a moon. Her stuffed animals arranged carefully along the headboard, all facing outward, watching. Checked the window. Closed. My fingers tested the latch, pressing, tugging lightly. Solid. Just the way I'd left it. The curtains were pulled halfway, moonlight tracing a thin silver line along the sill. No sign of disturbance. No cold air seeping in. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the glass, my reflection faint and distorted. I looked tired. Older than I felt a few hours earlier. If she hadn't gone out through the window, and she hadn't come down the stairs. I turned slowly, scanning the room again, my eyes landing on the closet door. Closed. Toy chest. The small bathroom door across the hall. Open, dark. Nothing moved. The silence pressed in around me, thick and deliberate. I became aware of how loudly my heart was beating, each pulse echoing in my ears. I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her. "She didn't come down," I whispered to myself. The words felt strange in my mouth. Incomplete. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was warm now, healthy. Normal. She looked like she always did when she slept. Peaceful, untroubled, miles away from whatever had pulled her out into the cold. The bed dipped slightly beneath my weight, and the mattress made a small sighing sound. She stirred but didn't wake. I tried to picture her getting out of this bed, pulling the blankets back just so, standing on the floor without making a sound, opening the door, walking past me. The thought tightened my chest. I stood again and walked the perimeter of the room, slow and methodical, like if I moved carefully enough I might notice something I'd missed. My fingers trailed along the wall, feeling the slight unevenness of the paint. The corner near the door where the baseboard always came loose. The light switch. I flipped it off. The room dimmed instantly, the lamp casting a softer glow now, shadows stretching and reshaping themselves. The hallway light still burned behind me. I glanced back at the door. The hallway felt farther away than it should have. Longer. Narrower. Like the space between rooms had quietly expanded. I stepped into the hall and looked toward the stairs. They descended into darkness now, the living room light no longer reaching this far. The banister caught the glow faintly, each spindle casting a thin shadow. I imagined her small hand there, resting, listening. A chill crawled up my arms, and I folded them across my chest. I checked the bathroom next. The sink was dry, the mirror clean, the window small and locked, untouched. The towel hung exactly where it always did, folded too neatly to have been used. Back in her room, I crouched beside the bed and looked underneath. A missing sock. Nothing else. I exhaled slowly, the breath shaking despite my effort to steady it. This room had not let her out. That realization settled heavy in my stomach. I sat back on the bed again, this time closer to her. I watched the rise and fall of her back, counted her breaths until my own began to match them. The house creaked softly somewhere below us, a familiar sound, like an old body adjusting its weight. "Where did you go?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. I stayed there until the clock on her dresser ticked past the next minute, then the next. Time moved cautiously, as if it didn't want to draw attention to itself. Eventually, I stood and pulled the door mostly closed, leaving it cracked just enough for light to slip through. I paused with my hand on the knob, listening. Nothing. As I walked back toward the stairs, I glanced once more into her room. She hadn't moved. The bed looked the same as before, like it had never been empty at all. At the top of the stairs I stopped. The hallway light buzzed faintly above me. I turned it off. Darkness rushed in, filling the space, erasing the sharp edges of things. The house felt different now, less certain, like it was holding something back. I stood there in the dark, listening to the quiet, trying to imagine the path she must have taken. Trying and failing to make it make sense. Downstairs a floorboard creaked, froze. Then it settled again. I told myself it was the house cooling. Pipes. Anything ordinary. But as I took the first step down, my hand gripping the banister tighter than necessary, one thought stayed with me. Her bed hadn't been slept in long enough to be cold. And that meant she hadn't been alone for very long at all. I guided her onto the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. The blankets smelled faintly of her laundry, warm and familiar. Her small hands rested in my lap, pale and trembling, like leaves caught in a winter wind. I took them gently in mine, pressed my thumbs to the backs, trying to bring warmth, trying to bring color back. The skin was cold, almost stiff, and I traced the lines on her knuckles as if reading a map I couldn't fully understand. She didn't move at first, just sat there silent, breathing shallowly. Her head bowed slightly, hair falling across her forehead. The room smelled like faint soap and lingering fear. "Do you remember?" I whispered, more to the silence than to her. "How you got outside?" Her fingers twitched under mine. A small, almost imperceptible movement. And then she lifted her eyes. Heavy, unfocused. They didn't quite meet mine, though she seemed to try. Like she was remembering something at the edge of her mind, but it wouldn't fully come. I don't know," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, uneven, as if the words were fragile and might break if spoken too loudly. I nodded slowly, pressing my thumbs in small circles. I felt the bones beneath, so small, so delicate. I felt the cold receding slowly, as if my hands could undo what the night had done. But the color didn't fully return, not yet. Not enough to erase the worry etched into her skin. She shrugs, slow and uncertain. The motion felt deliberate, almost careful, like she was testing her own memory. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. The shadows along the walls stretched long and thin, bending around the furniture. The lamp cast a warm glow, but it did little to chase the unease away. I wanted to ask again, but I couldn't find the words. The words I had seemed too blunt, too sharp for something this quiet, this fragile. Instead, I just held her hands, felt them relax a little beneath mine, felt the slight pulse returning, the faintest heat creeping back into her fingers. Her breathing deepened, slow and uneven. I noticed the small details, the rise of her shoulder beneath her nightshirt, the faint scent of her hair, the soft crease of her eyelids as they tried to close. She was present in pieces, but not fully. Half here, half somewhere else. Were you scared? I asked, my voice softer this time, almost a sigh. She tilted her head, considered me for a long moment, then shook it. Not forcefully. Just a small, almost imperceptible shake. Pause. That tiny movement told me more than words ever could. She wasn't lying. She hadn't been terrified. She hadn't been running. But she hadn't understood either. Not fully. The faint hum of the heater filled the spaces between us. Outside, the wind brushed against the siding. I imagined the porch light flickering in the cold. My stomach tightened. The house felt too big now. Too empty in places it shouldn't be. I rubbed her hands more firmly, careful not to hurt her. I traced the lines across her knuckles again. Felt the softness return, the warmth spreading slowly through the tips of her fingers. It was such a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Her eyes met mine for a fraction longer this time. Focused, but only just. There was a distance there I couldn't close. A memory slipping through her, just beyond reach. And it made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. I don't remember, she repeated, almost a whisper. The words were small, fragile and final. I nodded again, swallowing the worry I didn't know how to name. I brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. The gesture felt necessary but empty. It didn't explain the cold, the silence. Porch. I felt the pulse of her hand beneath mine, slow and steady now. Not normal but closer. The warmth creeping back was small, but it was progress. I leaned closer, just enough to whisper, "It's okay. We'll figure it out." She didn't reply. Her attention was somewhere else. On the ceiling, on the shadows, on something I couldn't see. Her lips moved slightly, as if forming a question she didn't dare voice. I realized then how much of her had stayed outside, in that porch light, in the cold that clung to her skin. Even now, inside, the memory lingered in pieces, half forgotten and intangible. I couldn't reach it. I could only hold what was in front of me. Her quiet hands, her small shoulders, her stillness. The room settled around us. The heater's hum softened. The shadows flattened. Time moved differently here, slowly, almost reluctantly. I felt it pressing against me, pressing her, trying to stretch what had happened into something tangible. I asked one more time, softly, gently, "Do you remember feeling anything out there?" She shook her head. Low, deliberate, hesitant. The answer was final and incomplete all at once. I pressed my forehead briefly to the back of her hand. The warmth there was faint but real. I let myself breathe just a little. Small comfort. A quiet anchor in the uncertainty. Outside, the wind whispered along the eaves. Inside, the room stayed calm but tense. Waiting. Watching. I could feel the house leaning in, listening to our quiet exchange, holding its secrets close. She shifted slightly, curling inwards on the bed, still wrapped in the coat I'd brought her. The blanket smelled like her, safe and mundane, a fragile tether to normalcy. I stayed there, hands on hers, letting the warmth return, letting the quiet linger. Waiting for a memory to surface. waiting for the question I wasn't ready to ask. Her fingers twitched under mine, almost imperceptibly, like they remembered something they couldn't name. I held them anyway, and for a moment the night felt less sharp. But the memory was still out there, somewhere, and I didn't know if she'd bring it back. The laughter reached me first, soft, warm, careless, rising and falling in the living room below, sharp against the quiet of the upstairs hallway. Sounded ordinary, comforting, familiar. My husband, my daughter's favorite show, maybe even the dog barking at the screen. All the usual pieces of a late evening. Yet something about it pricked at the edges of my mind, a tiny pull of unease I couldn't place. I stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing. The carpet was thick under my feet, muffling sound, yet I could hear it, every chuckle, every low hum of amusement. Counting voices came almost unconsciously. 1, 2, 3. Enough to fill the living room. Enough to reassure me. And yet not enough. The hallway behind me felt colder than it should have. Shadows pooled under the doors, stretching long and uncertain. The walls, painted soft cream, seemed to lean inward, pressing me against the quiet. I realized I was holding my breath. I took it back slowly. The floorboards below creaked occasionally. Each pop and groan pulled the laughter closer and farther at the same time. My daughter's bed was just behind me, tucked neatly, blankets smoothed as if no one had ever left it. My eyes darted to her small figure curled under the covers. Even asleep she felt elsewhere. I pressed my palm against the wall. The paint was slightly cool, slightly sticky. The warmth of the room below didn't reach me here. I could hear the hum of the heater through the vents, low, steady, indifferent. I leaned over the railing slightly. The living room smelled like popcorn and lemon cleaner. Warm air drifted upward. The soft lights glowed around the mugs left on the coffee table, steam still rising. Everything was normal. Everything was ordinary. And yet I felt the absence. Presence I could not name. I tried to pinpoint it. One laugh too high. Paused too long. The way my husband's chuckle dipped at the same time as the television. I counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I lost track. Enough voices were there. Familiar voices. But not the one that should have been. I backed away slightly. The stair carpet muffled the soft sound of my own shifting weight. The hallway seemed longer now, darker. The shadows lengthened toward the bedroom doors, curling along the edges like smoke. I pressed myself to the wall, tried to calm the unease tightening my chest. There was no rational reason for it. All the pieces were there. The house, the warmth, the laughter. My husband on the couch, smiling, eyes bright with amusement. The television humming beneath it all. All the pieces. Except one. I closed my eyes briefly. My daughter's hands, small and quiet, flickered across my memory. How cold they had been, how pale, how unresponsive at first. I felt the lingering weight of her coat in my arms. The memory didn't match the sound of the laughter. She should have been down there. Or someone else should have been up here. The contrast twisted the air. Warm below. Empty above. Familiar. Unknown. I counted the voices one more time. Each one ticked by like a second hand, deliberate, orderly, measured. They all belonged. None were missing from the floor. And yet, someone was missing from the space between them. I walked to her bedroom door. The light from the hallway fell across the threshold in a thin band. Her bed lay neat. The blankets smoothed. No trace of her absence except in my mind. The quiet stretched out between me and the laughter below. I pressed my ear to the door. The muffled sound of the heater mixed with the voices downstairs. I tried to imagine her there, laughing, blending with the rest. Couldn't. Something was out of place. Her presence, or maybe someone else's, was echoing in the gaps, subtle and ungraspable. I moved closer to the railing, peering down again. My husband's laughter rose. The television blended with it. Each mug on the coffee table caught the light like tiny sentinels. I felt a chill despite the warmth below. A floorboard popped behind me. Turned quickly. Nothing. Just the hall. Just the walls. Shadows stretching over the carpet like thin fingers. I exhaled slowly, letting my back touch the wall. My daughter's small form on the bed felt solid, comforting, necessary. Yet my eyes kept drifting down. The laughter shifted. One of the voices paused, just slightly, and my stomach lurched. It wasn't the change itself. It was the way the room felt different in that fraction of a second. The gap left by a missing thread in the fabric of sound. I swallowed hard. Tried to anchor myself. Tried to remind myself the room was full. The house was full. She was upstairs. Everything was fine. And still the sense of absence remained. I pressed my hands to my face. The heat of my palms felt like armor against it. The quiet upstairs pressed around me. The laughter below continued, rising, falling. Sharp against the silence. Familiar. Comforting. Mocking. I imagined her standing on the porch, thin pajamas clinging to her skin, cold creeping along her toes. I imagined her moving through the rooms unnoticed. I imagined something or someone, filling the space that should have been hers. The thought made the air heavy. I counted the voices again. Slowly. 2, 3, 4. Enough. And yet not enough. I realized I had been listening to them as if the answer lay in the count, in the rise and fall of sound. But it wasn't in the numbers. It was in the spaces in between. In the tiny absences that I couldn't name. In the faint echo that didn't belong to anyone visible. I pressed my forehead against the railing. My hands gripped the wood tight enough to leave marks. The warmth of the laughter below almost mocked me. Almost dared me to understand what I couldn't. A shadow passed across the window at the end of the hallway. The moonlight shifted. For a moment I imagined her standing there. Her small hand resting lightly on the glass, watching. I blinked. She wasn't there. The hallway felt longer. The shadows deeper. The laughter below continued, oblivious to the questions it had stirred. I straightened slowly. My fingers released the railing. My feet moved back toward her door. Her quiet presence in the bed, her breathing slow, even, steady, grounded me. Now. But the absence lingered, humming faintly in the space between the laughter and the dark. And I knew it wasn't finished. The front door felt impossibly cold under my palm. I pressed my hand flat against the wood, feeling the grain press into my skin, the chill climbing up my wrist. Outside, the wind rattled against the siding, low and persistent, a reminder that the night was still alive. I ran my fingers over the brass doorknob. Solid. Familiar. And the deadbolt, tight, turned exactly where I had left it hours ago. No scratches. No forced movement. No sign that anyone had touched it since I locked it that night. The porch light flickered again, casting shadows across the snow-dusted steps. I could see the faint imprint of my daughter's small footprints, now frozen and pale under the cold. She had been there, barefoot, alone, or so it seemed. I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging against the glass. The house behind me was warm, still humming from the heater. Inside, my husband had already returned to the couch, the television murmuring low in the background. The house smelled like popcorn and detergent, ordinary and safe. Too safe. I traced the lock again, turning it back and forth, just to be sure. Nothing moved. The door didn't budge beyond the control of the deadbolt and knob. Every window was intact, each frame closed and secure. No glass shattered. No hinges tampered with. And yet she had been outside. I leaned my forehead against the door, the cold pressing through my hair, through my skin, through everything I thought I knew about the night. How had she gotten out? How had she returned to the porch without opening the door? The question clung to me, heavy and unwelcome. I could feel it settling into my bones as I knelt briefly on the porch, brushing the snow from the steps with my gloved hands. The prince stared back at me. Small, perfect, frozen in time. Each step leading away, then ending abruptly. Inside, the living room felt suddenly smaller, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stepped back, the floorboards groaning beneath me, soft but deliberate. My daughter's room was above, blankets folded neatly on the bed, her small form curled under the covers. She looked peaceful, if innocent, yet the porch told a different story. I pressed my palm against the door again, feeling for the faintest vibration. Nothing. The wood was cold and unyielding. I ran my hand down the frame, checking the edges. No gap. No weakness. The door hadn't been opened. Not tonight. The silence pressed in around me, broken only by the soft hum of the heater and the faint wind outside. Every detail was ordinary, every piece accounted for, and still the impossible had occurred. I leaned back against the doorframe, hands pressed to my face. My thoughts tumbled in quiet loops. Could she have sleepwalked? But the door was locked. The windows were secure. Could someone have entered, left, waited? The thought made the air sharp, the night suddenly heavier. I ran my fingers through my hair, the cold still pressing against my palms, and tried to calm the unease twisting inside me. The house was sealed. The night had no cracks. The warmth inside should have been enough. Should have kept her safe. And yet it hadn't. I bent down, tracing the footprints in the snow again. Each toe mark, each tiny heel, etched into the porch like a puzzle piece I couldn't quite fit. I followed them with my eyes, imagining the sequence. Step, step, step. Turn. Return. The steps led nowhere. The return was impossible. Inside, a muffled laugh drifted from the living room, normal and light. My husband, my familiar world, all intact. The sound should have reassured me. Didn't. It only made the impossibility sharper. How could this be? I pressed my forehead to the door again, tracing the edges, the lock, the frame. Everything was secure. Everything said she couldn't have left. And yet she had. I crouched on the porch, fingertips brushing the frozen footprints, trying to memorize their pattern. The night felt alive around me, the wind whispering along the siding, stirring the snow in tiny, deliberate gusts. A single tree branch scraped lightly against the siding, scratching a soft rhythm. Each sound exaggerated in the stillness, each whisper a reminder of what had happened here. I closed my eyes, picturing her. Small, thin pajamas, bare toes pressed against cold wood. The surprise in her eyes when I found her on the porch. Her quiet stillness, her blank expression. How had she moved through this house, through this night, and returned untouched? I pressed my palm to the door one last time, letting the chill seep into my bones. The warmth inside beckoned, but the question remained, heavy, unyielding. How did she get out? How did she come back? I turned slowly, stepping back from the door. The living room light spilled into the entryway, soft and ordinary, washing over the tiled floor. My husband's laughter rose again, low and careless. My daughter's small form slept upstairs, undisturbed. The house was whole. And yet, the impossible lingered in the air. I looked back at the door one final time. Sealed. Unyielding. The night outside pressed against it, cold and indifferent. The footprints remained, frozen and unanswered. Small reminders of a moment that shouldn't have been possible. I exhaled slowly, letting the warmth from inside chase the chill from my fingers. My heart was still tight, my mind still circling. Something had happened here. Something I could not yet name. The house hummed around me, ordinary and peaceful, masking the truth in its steady rhythm. But I knew. Somewhere in the quiet, in the locked door, in the frozen steps, a question waited. And it wasn't finished. I stepped inside, the door clicking softly behind me, sealing the night outside. The impossible was still there, waiting, watching. And I didn't know if I'd ever understand it. The room smelled faintly of lavender, of the night detergent I'd used on her sheets. The light from the hallway fell in a thin strip across the floor, touching the edge of the bed where she sat. She hugged her knees, small and still, as if the cold outside had followed her upstairs and settled in her bones. I crouched beside her, careful not to jostle the blankets. Her hair fell in loose strands across her face. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my shifting weight. I pressed a hand to her shoulder. She flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the lingering numbness of her body, of the cold she'd carried back with her. I traced my thumb along the curve of her wrist. Slowly, carefully. Warmth returned little by little. "Did you hear something?" I asked, my voice gentle, a whisper meant to anchor her to the moment. She looked up at me finally, eyes heavy, distant. They didn't focus fully, as if the memory she was pulling from was already fraying at the edges. "I heard laughing," she said. Her voice was small, flat, almost swallowed by the quiet around us. "Not downstairs. Not from you. From here." Froze. The mattress creaked under her weight, soft, deliberate, every sound exaggerated in the stillness. I let her words hang between us. Let the quiet stretch. "Here," I whispered. She nodded, eyes wide now but vacant, like the memory was present but unreachable. "I thought it was you," she murmured. "So I followed it." I pressed my lips together, trying to understand. The image formed slowly in my mind. Her small feet on the cold wood floor, hair sticking to her cheeks, drawn by the sound of laughter that wasn't ours. The heater clicked softly, marking the passage of moments that felt both long and impossibly short. Shadows from the lamp stretched across the walls, bending around furniture, around her form. "I thought it was you," she repeated, voice trailing off. "But it wasn't. So I went outside." The words hung like smoke in the room. I pressed my forehead to my palm. The logic of it twisted my chest. How could laughter in a room lead a child out into the freezing dark instead of toward the warmth of us, toward the light she knew? I reached out and took her hand. It was still faintly cold, but the color was returning. She didn't resist. She let me hold it, small fingers curling around mine. "Did it sound happy?" "Yes." My voice was careful, measured. She thought for a moment, tilted her head. The shadows along the wall shifted as she moved slightly. "Yes," she said finally. "But not like you. Not like different." Her words pressed against me in a way the cold never could. Different. Not us. Not familiar. Not safe. I ran a hand along the edge of her bed frame. Cold wood beneath my palm, grounding myself. The room smelled faintly of lavender, of soap, of something else I couldn't name. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as if listening. I traced the lines of her sheets with my fingers, smoothing them out absent-mindedly, trying to chase away the echo of her memory. The laughter she heard, the sound that drew her from warmth into the night, lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't chase. "Did it call you?" I asked, careful not to push too hard. "Did it say anything?" She shook her head, slow, deliberate. "No words. Just laughing." Her small chest rose and fell rapidly, uncertain breaths mingling with the heater's soft hum. "I thought it was you. But it wasn't." I let her sit there for a moment. Let her tell me as much as she could, and as much as the memory allowed. My fingers never left hers. The warmth seeped through, small and deliberate, grounding both of us. I thought of the porch, of her footprints in the frozen snow. How small feet had moved through impossible spaces. How the door had been locked, windows secure, the house seemingly intact. And yet she had followed something. Something that called her from warmth to frost. The lamp flickered slightly, throwing brief shadows across her room. I noticed every detail. The curve of her ear, the soft crease in her pajamas, the line of her jaw as she tried to recall the night. Each small thing held weight, told stories her words could not. "Did it scare you?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She considered me, eyes heavy. "No, not really." Her lips pressed together. "I wasn't scared. I just followed." I pressed a hand to her shoulder. Warm now. Steady. Solid. My chest tightened. The thought that she had walked willingly into the dark, guided by laughter that wasn't ours, made the room smaller, colder. Her small hand twitched under mine, the pulse faint but steady. I squeezed gently. Tried to anchor her, tried to anchor myself. Tried to make sense of the impossible. I thought of the locked door, of the footprints on the porch. of the empty spaces in the laughter downstairs. And I realized that what she had heard, what drew her out, was still here. Somewhere. Waiting. Watching. The heater clicked again. Shadows shifted. I let her hand rest in mine, the warmth slowly returning. The room smelled like lavender, like sheets, like the faint residue of a night that had changed everything. She lay back on the bed slightly, curling inwards. It was heavy. Memory frayed. She didn't speak again. Just rested, letting the quiet wrap around her. I sat there beside her, hand still in hers. The room held its breath. Outside, the wind whispered against the siding, scraping faintly at the windows. The impossible lingered in the corners, in the frozen spaces between memory and reality. Her eyes closed slowly, uncertain, trusting me to be here. I pressed my palm to hers, small, fragile, warm. And for a moment the room felt safe again. But the laughter she heard, inside her room, before the porch, before the cold, remained, echoing quietly somewhere I could not reach. And I knew it wasn't finished. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and dim. I moved slowly, hand trailing along the wall, fingertips brushing the slight roughness of the paint. The overhead light flickered once before dimming entirely, leaving only the soft glow from her bedroom spilling out. I flipped the switch on the first light and then the next. Each click echoed softly in the stillness. Shadows lengthened along the walls, bending around corners and door frames. They were familiar shapes, coat hooks, picture frames, the slight dip of the carpet near the stairs, but altered somehow, as if the night had stretched the space, pulled it thin. I felt smaller here, stretched against the house, trying to measure the distance between what was known and what had happened. The air smelled faintly of detergent, lavender, and the residual warmth of the heater. The hum of the furnace was steady, comforting, but even that sound seemed distant now, as if muffled by the weight of the night. I could hear the quiet creak of the floors beneath my feet, each step deliberate, each groan a punctuation in the silence. I stopped briefly, just outside her bedroom. The door was closed this time, warm light spilling faintly through the edges. I pressed an ear to the door, listening. Her breathing was steady, even. Yet the pause between my steps and the sound of her chest moving seemed too long, too deliberate, as if the house itself were holding its breath with me. I thought of the laughter, the impossible footprints, the locked doors. How small hands had moved through this space, guided by a sound I could not follow. The hallway suddenly felt wider, more empty than it had hours ago, and I wondered if the distance between rooms had grown, or if I had simply begun noticing the spaces I had always ignored. I pressed a palm against the wall, feeling the subtle warmth from the heater vent behind it. I let my fingers linger over the switch plate. The paint felt slightly cool under my skin, grounding me in the tactile reality of the home. Yet my mind drifted, tracing the path she had taken, the spaces she had crossed. The journey through the hallway, the rooms, the porch. It felt like walking through memory itself, broken and thin. The quiet pressed against me from all sides. Each door I passed seemed to hold its own shadow, its own secret. The bathroom door, the linen closet, even the small nook beneath the stairs. Each space now seemed separate, more distant than I had ever realized. The house had always been familiar, but tonight it felt altered, fragmented, as though the night had pulled the walls apart, leaving empty corridors between the rooms I knew. I lingered outside her bedroom again. The soft light from within glowed faintly across the hall, illuminating the tiny specks of dust suspended in the air. I noticed them for the first time, how they moved, caught in the glow, small motes dancing silently. The air seemed thicker here, weighty with something I could not name. Was it fear? Or just the memory of her small body, so cold and still on the porch, echoing through the night? I listened again. The silence inside her room was steady, punctuated only by the faint hum of the heater. The ordinary rhythm of the house was reassuring, but I could not shake the feeling that it was holding something back. Was the quiet protecting us, giving us space to breathe? Or was it hiding something I didn't yet see, waiting for me to notice the cracks? I let my hand slide down the wall, brushing against the doorway, lingering on the frame. The edges were smooth, familiar, solid. I drew in a slow breath, letting the warmth of the house chase away the chill from the night. My chest tightened as I considered how she had moved through this space. The impossible sequence of steps she had taken, the small footprints that led from warmth to frost and back, seemed heavier in this silence, more deliberate than I could ever understand. I glanced down the hallway again. The lights I had turned off cast long shadows into the distance, bending and stretching the space between rooms. The living room, the kitchen, the small hall to the front door, they all seemed farther away, as if the night had grown the house, making it larger than it was in daylight. I realized I had always walked these halls unconsciously, never noticing the gaps, the subtle distances. Tonight every inch mattered. Every shadow counted. I pressed my palm against the light switch outside the last bedroom, leaving the faint glow from her room as the only light in the hall. The edges of the shadows seemed sharper now, the space between them deeper. I could hear the faint settling of the house, wood contracting, paint stretching. The small noises that usually went unnoticed were amplified in the quiet. Every sound, every absence of sound seemed significant. I moved a step closer to her door, fingertips brushing the frame. The light from inside spilled out slightly, illuminating the dust motes again. I imagined her small figure lying beneath the blankets, eyes closed, unaware of the hallway outside. The space between us felt suddenly vast, an invisible stretch of air I could not cross. The hallway seemed endless in that moment, a corridor of memory and impossibility. I thought of the laughter she had heard, the path it had drawn her on, the cold and frozen porch where she had stood. Each step through the night, each movement through the house, seemed more deliberate now, more tangible. The silence wasn't empty. It was waiting, filled with questions I could not yet answer. I exhaled slowly, letting my back press lightly against the wall. My hand lingered on the doorframe. I thought of her voice, small and flat, telling me about the laughter, the sound that had led her outside. The impossible logic of it pressed against the edges of my understanding. The silence was not empty. It was full. Full of questions, full of the unknown. The air shifted faintly, carrying the warmth of the heater and the lingering chill from outside. Shadows shifted as I moved slightly, bending with the light. I realized that the space between rooms had grown, not physically but in my perception. Every doorway, every corner, every stretch of hallway now felt significant, charged with meaning. I pressed my forehead briefly against the doorframe, letting the quiet envelop me. Her breathing was steady, the light spilling across the floor, dust motes floating in their lazy dance. The house hummed softly, ordinary yet changed, familiar yet distant. And I knew in that moment that the spaces between rooms were no longer just hallways. They were pauses, gaps, stretches of time and memory and impossibility. They were waiting for something, waiting for me to notice, waiting for her to tell me, waiting for the night to reveal what it had hidden. I turned slowly back down the hall, leaving her room's light spilling behind me. Each step echoed softly, deliberate, measured. The shadows followed, bending, stretching, shifting with a glow from the distant room. The house was quiet now, holding its breath, waiting. And I realized the space between rooms was more than distance. It was the margin of the night itself, a place where the impossible had passed through and left its mark. I let the quiet settle around me, soft but insistent. The hallway stretched endlessly. The rooms lay waiting. And the space between them held the questions I could not yet answer. The night was far from over. The room is dark, but the edges of the lamp from the hallway leak faint light across the floor. I lie still, staring at the ceiling, the pattern of shadows shifting slowly, like the movement of someone pacing just beyond my vision. The heater hums softly, a low, steady rhythm. Yet I feel the cold pressing against my ribs, not from the room, not from the night, but from something else entirely. She curls against my side, small and trembling at first. Her thin pajamas cling to her skin, damp in places from the earlier frost. I wrap my arm around her, letting my warmth seep through, but she never fully relaxes. Her little body presses close, but I can feel the tension, the memory of the cold still lingering beneath her skin. I try to focus on the ordinary, the rise and fall of her chest, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the faint creak of the floorboards outside the door. But my mind keeps returning to the porch, the way her feet met the frost, the way she had stood there, small and still without surprise. It's impossible. And yet, I remember it in vivid detail. The thin pajamas, the redness of her toes, the faint mist of breath in the night air. The cold outside was sharp, biting, immediate. But this cold now, the one pressing against me, is quieter, heavier. It lives in the spaces between heartbeats, in the corners of the room, in the silence between our breathing. It's the kind of cold that seeps into memory, into something that cannot be measured or touched, only felt. I press a hand gently to her back, fingers brushing the damp strands of hair along her neck. She doesn't shift. Her eyes are closed, but her small hand twitches occasionally against my chest. I imagine the moment she had stepped onto the porch, the air biting her skin, the snow crunching beneath her feet. And I remember the look in her eyes. Calm, unafraid, almost expectant. I whisper her name softly, letting it float in the quiet. She doesn't answer. She never did that night. She followed something and I cannot imagine what it was. Not me. Not warmth. Something else. Something I cannot see. The night stretches on. Every little sound is magnified. The faint hum of the heater, the creak of the bed frame, the wind brushing against the window. I feel it all, every vibration, every echo, as if the house itself is holding a secret in its bones. And I know that cold I feel now is tied to that moment, tied to what she left behind when she stepped out. I close my eyes briefly, imagining her small hand pressing against the porch railing, her breath rising in clouds, her body small against the vastness of the night. And then the house, warm, sealed, familiar, behind her. She had crossed it, unnoticed, untouched, following something I cannot name. I shift slightly, careful not to disturb her. Her head rests lightly against my chest, small curls brushing against my collarbone. I can feel the faint pulse of her body, slowly warming, slowly letting go of some of the chill. But the tension never fully leaves her. Something remains, buried under the surface, quiet but insistent. I trace a finger along her arm, over the slight goosebumps that remain. She lets out a soft sigh, and I hold it in my mind, the sound of her breathing steady but wary. I wonder what she remembers from that night. Does she remember the frost biting her toes? The laughter that drew her? The impossibility of it all? Or is it already slipping like water through fingers, leaving only fragments behind? I sit with her, still, letting the quiet fill the room. Shadows cling to the corners, bending with the light from the hallway. Every movement, every small sound seems sharper now, more deliberate. The ordinary has become strange. The house is familiar, yet somehow different, stretched along the edges of memory and impossibility. I press my lips to the top of her head, feeling the soft pulse of warmth that has returned to her cheeks. And still I think of the porch. Still I replay the moment over and over. The way she had stood there, thin pajamas, bare toes, calm as if stepping into the cold was ordinary. I cannot shake the thought. The night is long. We lie together, bodies pressed close, and I let her warmth seep into me, into my own frozen pulse. Yet the cold remains. Not outside. Not the wind. Something else. Something more than frost or darkness. Something she has carried with her, or perhaps something that followed her back. I think of the impossible sequence. Her steps out, the locked door, the laughter that drew her. Every detail echoes now in the quiet, magnified in my mind. And the cold I feel is not simply the memory of winter, but the weight of what I cannot understand. Her small hand twitches against my chest again. I trace the line of her fingers with my thumb. She shifts slightly, settling closer. Her hair brushes against my neck. She breathes. But the memory of the porch remains vivid, pressing against me as heavily as the night air outside. I whisper to the shadows in the room, to the corners and the quiet spaces between the walls. What did you step away from, my love? I ask softly, the words barely leaving my lips. The house hums softly in response, ordinary and indifferent. I feel her warmth spreading slowly through my side, but it is uneven, hesitant, like the memory of that night, like the cold that has nothing to do with weather. It coils through the silence, wrapping itself around the bed, filling the spaces I cannot see. I press my hand to hers, feeling the tiny pulse under my fingers. I imagine the night outside, the frost, the impossible calm in her eyes. And I understand in a way I cannot name, that the cold is more than physical, it is memory, it is absence, it is the space between what was and what should have been. The shadows in the room shift slightly with the heater's soft hum. Every creak of the house seems louder, deliberate, as if listening. And I realize I have never felt cold like this before. Not the wind, not the frost, but the kind of cold that comes from stepping away from something larger than yourself, and leaving it behind even unknowingly. I hold her a little tighter, letting the warmth of my chest seep through, letting the quiet settle around us. I try to imagine the world beyond the room, beyond the porch, beyond the impossible sequence of footsteps and laughter. But it eludes me. It always does. I press my lips again to her hair, softly, gently. And in the quiet, I understand that tonight we do not sleep. We do not move. We exist together, pressed into one another, bodies warming, hearts holding, minds circling the impossible. The cold is not leaving. It never will, not fully. It lingers in the corners, in the silence, in the memory of the porch, in the spaces between warmth and fear. And I realize I do not know what she stepped away from, and perhaps I never will. I close my eyes finally, holding her close, feeling the uneven warmth, the pulse of life against my side. The night is long, and outside, the world presses against the walls. The cold remains. Question remains. And I know the morning will not answer it. The first light of morning slips through the blinds, pale and fragile, casting thin stripes across the kitchen floor. The air smells faintly of toast, coffee, and the lingering frost from outside. I lean against the doorway, watching her small hands move over the plate, careful and precise, avoiding spills. The sunlight touches her hair in gold streaks, but it cannot warm the memory of the night. She eats quietly, not looking up. I notice the way she keeps her elbows close, her small body angled slightly away from the hallway, from the rooms that held her yesterday. Every movement is deliberate, cautious. She seems to be guarding herself, as if the walls, the floor, even the sunlight, might betray something she isn't ready to name. I breathe slowly, listening to the faint scrape of her spoon against the plate. The sound is ordinary, domestic, and yet under it lies a tension I cannot dismiss. The laughter, the cold, the impossible path she took through the house last night, they linger between us, unspoken but palpable, filling the spaces in the morning that should have felt ordinary. The heater hums softly, and I notice the slight chill in the air, not from the weather, but from the weight pressing down on my chest. I want to speak, to name it, to say aloud what I feel. But I pause. Words, once spoken, have a way of making things more real, more permanent. And some fears are too delicate to call into existence. He sits at the table across from us, coffee in hand, and cracks a joke about the cold snap last night. He smiles, casual and unburdened, unaware of the frost that still clings to my thoughts, the way it had gripped her tiny toes on the porch. He doesn't see the tension in her shoulders, the slow, careful way she lifts each bite to her mouth. I watch him, and I feel the quiet impossibility of yesterday pressing against the morning light. The house is ordinary again, dishes on the counter, mugs steaming, crumbs on the table, but my mind is elsewhere, circling the questions I cannot answer. How did she leave the warmth of her room and step into the cold? Why did she follow the sound she heard instead of staying with us? Her small hand twitches slightly, brushing against the edge of the plate. I imagine it in the dark, pressed against the porch railing, frost biting her skin, the soft laughter floating in the air around her. I close my eyes briefly, letting the memory drift in the quiet. It is too much to hold and too strange to release, all at once. The sun shifts slowly across the room, brushing the walls with a pale glow. I notice the faint outline of dust in the light, tiny motes floating, catching the gold. They remind me of the night before, the way shadows had stretched and bent, altering the familiar shapes of the house. Even now, in the daylight, those memories linger at the edges of vision, unshakable. I sip my coffee slowly, feeling the warmth slide down my throat. The ordinary act is grounding, but my mind cannot stay in the moment. I glance at her, at him, at the room we all inhabit together. The contrast between the sunlight and the dark memory is stark. I realize the house is the same, but we are not. Something shifted last night. Something remains, even in the brightness. I want to speak to him, to tell him everything. The laughter, the porch, the impossible calm in her eyes. But I stop. The words hang heavy in my throat. If I name it, it might take on a life of its own. If I speak it aloud, we might never return to the safety of unknowing. Some things, I decide, are better held in quiet observation. She finishes her breakfast and pushes the plate away. Her movements are still careful, deliberate. She doesn't glance at the hallway, doesn't mention her room, doesn't ask about the porch. Her silence is a shield, and I respect it. I imagine the small fortress she has built around herself, brick by brick, to contain the memory, to contain the cold, to contain the questions she cannot yet answer. He chuckles again, sipping coffee, and I notice how ordinary he seems, how grounded in the mundane. And I feel the tension stretch between us, fragile and invisible. The morning light cannot dissolve it, cannot warm it. I wonder if he will ever sense it, if he will ever notice the subtle fractures that now run through our house, our family, our lives. I reach over and brush a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes meet mine briefly, small and unfocused, holding back the weight of the night. I nod slightly, and she nods back, the gesture tiny but full of understanding. No words are needed. We acknowledge it silently. The impossible, the unexplained, the cold that clings to her memory and mine alike. The house hums quietly around us, ordinary sounds layered over extraordinary questions. The heater, the fridge, the distant hum of the street outside. All mundane, all grounding. Yet beneath it, the night lingers, ghosting through the corners, whispering reminders of the frost, the laughter, the path she took. I shift in my chair, taking another slow sip of coffee. I notice the sunlight on the table, how it stretches across the wood in uneven lines. Shadows fall gently over the mugs, over crumbs and plates, over the space where yesterday's fear had pressed. I let the quiet fill me, trying to anchor myself in the ordinary while acknowledging the impossibility of what I cannot explain. Her hand brushes lightly against mine, and I squeeze it softly. She doesn't speak, but the small connection is enough. I imagine the night dissolving around us, but I know the memory will remain, folded into the edges of our days, creeping back in small moments. The chill of early morning, the silence between footsteps, the sound of laughter that should not exist. I glance at him one last time. He laughs again, unaware, ordinary. And I feel the weight pressing on my chest, the tension that morning light cannot erase. I consider speaking, telling him everything, but the thought of making it real stops me. Some things must remain unspoken, carried quietly, contained in shadows, felt in subtle pulses rather than words. The sunlight shifts across the room again, touching her hair, her hands, the edge of the table. I notice the gentle warmth, the ordinary rhythm of breakfast ending, plates cleared, coffee cooling. And yet, beneath it, the memory persists, an echo of frost, laughter, and the impossible night. I let my breath slow, settling into the quiet, the ordinary light, the calm hum of the house. The questions remain, pressing gently, unanswerable for now. I hold my daughter's hand warm against mine, and I allow myself a small moment of peace in the tension between night and morning, between memory and sunlight, between the cold and the warmth that fills the room. And I know, even as the day begins, that some things will remain unseen, some paths untraced, and some questions, silent, impossible, will follow us through every ordinary morning after. The hallway light casts long shadows across the floor, stretching like fingers that reach for the corners of the house. I stand by the door, hand resting lightly on the knob, and watch. The house hums softly with the ordinary. The fridge, the heater, the quiet creak of settling wood. But under it there is something else. A memory I cannot shake. A sound that belongs to neither night nor day. I linger, even when there is nothing to do. I check the locks again, one by one, tracing each with my fingers. Deadbolts, latches, doors closed tight. Everything secured against the outside world. Yet my heart keeps telling me it isn't the world I should fear. It is the space behind the doors, the place where yesterday's laughter lingered, where warmth and cold collided, and where the impossible passage of my daughter began and ended. Her bedroom door sits slightly ajar. I watch it during the day, and especially at night, when shadows turn it into something darker, unfamiliar. I find myself pacing the hallway, sometimes stopping mid-step just to listen. Every floorboard creak, every distant hum of the house makes me pause. I wait for the smallest hint, the faintest echo, anything that might explain the nights when the ordinary broke and left questions I cannot name. She sleeps now with a trust that seems new, tentative, as if she remembers but refuses to speak it. I linger by her bedside longer than I did before, brushing stray hair from her forehead, tucking the blanket closer around her. Her chest rises and falls slowly, rhythm steady, yet I can feel the echo of her tiny footsteps on the porch, the cold biting her toes, the laughter that led her there. My fingers linger at her hand. She doesn't wake, doesn't stir. And I realize I am holding on to more than warmth. I am holding on to certainty that I no longer have. The house is quiet. Too quiet. The day stretches on, filled with the hum of routine, and I move through it like someone walking through a familiar photograph, noticing all the details but afraid to touch them. Dishes are washed, the mail is sorted, clothes folded and put away. Yet the edges of everything, the walls, the doors, the floors, seem altered subtly, as if the house itself remembers what I cannot fully comprehend. At night I sometimes hear it, laughter. Soft, careless, impossible. Not from her room, not from downstairs, but somewhere in between, echoing just beyond the reach of light. It drifts through the hallways like smoke, familiar and yet foreign. My heart tightens, and I stop moving, letting the sound wash over me. I know it should not be there, yet part of me expects it, waits for it, as though the house itself is telling me to pay attention. I double-check her door before bed. I listen to the quiet, pressing my ear to the wood. It is solid, immovable, familiar. But still, my mind drifts to the impossible moment on the porch, the thin layer of frost on her toes, the way she didn't seem startled to be outside. I imagine the laughter she followed, the path she took through the dark, and the question lingers. Did the house let her go or bring her back? I notice the subtle changes in my own movements. I approach each door with care, hand lightly grazing the frame, eyes flicking to hinges, locks, edges. The ordinary motions of entering and exiting feel heavy with history now. Every step echoes slightly differently on the floorboards. Even the air seems thicker, holding memories I cannot reach, yet feel pressing against my skin. I linger at the kitchen door in the early morning, half expecting to see her standing outside, bathed in pale light. I wait for the weight of frost to bite at her small fingers, for the light in her eyes that was not there before. But the hallway remains empty. I close the door softly, listening to the click of the latch. The sound should be normal, but it carries an echo, a shadow of the night I cannot forget. The living room is ordinary again. Mugs on the counter, blankets folded on the couch, sunlight spilling over the floor. My husband reads the paper, unaware of the tension curling around me like smoke. He doesn't notice the way I linger in doorways, the way my hands graze knobs, the way my mind drifts to the porch, the cold, the laughter. He smiles at her later, casual and unburdened, and I watch, knowing some part of me cannot relax until the impossible is named, or perhaps forever unsaid. Sometimes when she sleeps, I imagine following her path in reverse. From the porch, down the stairs, past doors that never opened, through hallways that stretch impossibly long. I trace the echoes of her small, unafraid steps, trying to understand why the ordinary world could not hold her, why the house itself seemed to move beneath her feet, bending to some unseen rhythm. And I find only more questions, the answers folding quietly into shadows. I check the locks one last time before sleep. Deadbolt latch knob. Everything is secure. Pause by her door listening. Nothing. The silence is full, heavy, protective. I place my hand lightly on the frame, feeling the warmth of the house settle beneath my palm. And yet, in that stillness, I know the memory of her footsteps, the cold she carried, the laughter she followed. It lingers, patient and persistent, waiting for me to notice again. The night deepens. Outside, wind rustles faintly, brushing against windows. Inside, the house breathes quietly, ordinary in appearance but alive with what it has witnessed. I lie awake for a long time, hand resting on her door, thinking about the way the impossible passed through us, about the frost and laughter and silence. I do not sleep fully, but I am not restless. Only alert, waiting, watching. And in that half-light, I realize something I have known all along. Some doors must always be watched. Some questions remain too fragile to speak aloud. And the house, patient and knowing, holds both the absence and the return, the letting go and the bringing back. I close my eyes finally, yet my hand remains lightly on the door, my mind tracing the echoes of a night that will never be entirely behind us. In the quiet I hear nothing, and still I wonder, did the house decide? Or was it my daughter alone, stepping lightly through the dark, guided by something I will never see? I do not answer. I only watch, hand resting on the door, heart leaning into the shadow, waiting for the next impossible moment to unfold.